Alberta's energy sector just can't catch a break. Adding to those oil price woes, the natural gas industry is facing what one veteran is calling a crisis. Peyto Exploration said the same thing in announcing a massive cut to its dividend. Hal Kvisle joins us now. He says it's the worst situation he's seen for the gas sector in 40 years. He's formerly the CEO of TransCanada, but he just co-chaired a Nat Gas advisory panel for the Alberta government. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
You've been around for a long time. You are suggesting that Alberta think about a drastic step to actually force the industry to cut natural gas production to try to reduce these huge discounts.
I don't think it necessarily needs to be a drastic step. You know, this is quite a bit different situation than crude oil.
Okay.
On the natural gas system, most of Alberta's gas and a fair bit from Northeast BC comes into TransCanada's NGTL system. And there have been some changes over the past decade in how NGTL allocates capacity to people. And that has created a bit of a breakdown in the trading around what we call the Nova Inventory Transfer Hub. It's all quite a complex commercial arrangement that we have on the gas system in Alberta. And what our panel is suggesting, first of all, is the producers sit down with TransCanada and figure out the best way of allocating capacity. It's tragic when capacity out of the Alberta hub is constrained, is running at less than what the pipe could handle because of problems that are upstream. There's just some very confusing things there that we think the government should encourage producers and TransCanada to take a look at. I want to be emphatic. Our panel did not recommend that Alberta would impose government cutbacks on production in order to balance the market. We think there's an intermediate step here that could be taken with producers in TransCanada just agreeing on some different administrative practices that would solve a lot of this problem. The one other big issue that we face right now is producers find it very difficult to access storage when they most need to access it. And that's during the summer months when gas demand and gas flows out of Alberta are down a bit. And we think that the Alberta government could encourage TransCanada and the producers to figure out a little bit better method that would work there.
So obviously it is a complex system. You're a former boss of TransCanada. Do you think TransCanada should be more cooperative with the gas producers?
No, I think TransCanada is willing to be very cooperative here. This is not a TransCanada issue. Where a lot of this began was with a very unfortunate National Energy Board decision in 2011 when the NEB ruled that TransCanada would become exposed to taking write-downs on various parts of their system that might be underutilized from time to time. That decision was instigated by the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers, and I think most CAP members would look back on that today and regret it. It was right at the tail end of the declining gas production era in Alberta, just before gas production started to pick up as a result of shale developments in the Montney. And it was really an unfortunate thing that happened at the wrong time. It's caused TransCanada to require long-term contracts to protect its interests if they're going to be exposed to those write-downs. So, you know, I don't think TransCanada is to blame here. I think people just need to sit down and talk this through and figure out a better way of doing it.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have time to get into all the ins and outs. I mean, should the government knock heads together here?
Well, you know, there's a government role as well here. When you look, I was interested listening just 45 minutes ago to Derek Burney on BNN talking about the problems of excessive regulation. And I think Derek's time as a board member at TransCanada would have opened his eyes to the burdens of excessive regulation in the energy sector. It's really quite horrific. And what TransCanada is faced with today is expanding capacity from Grand Prairie in northwest Alberta to Empress on the Alberta-Saskatchewan border, and having to go through ponderous National Energy Board procedures to get approval to effectively put one pipe in beside pipes that already exist. This takes more than 3 years to get through that process. It's unreasonable. And at the root cause, when you say what is really bedeviling people like Peyto and other gas producers in Western Canada, it's the ponderous slowness of getting NEB approval to expand capacity. That's the real problem at the end of the day that we have to fix. And I'm just afraid that federal regulatory practices are going in the wrong direction on that.
So we're looking here, this is from your report, of the nature of the gas business. I mean, it is obviously dominated by a few huge players, Canadian Natural, Tourmaline, Peyto. Peyto is a serious player, as we can see. So does the competitive nature of the natural gas business contribute in any way to this problem?
A little bit. It's quite interesting that there are some producers who have very strong balance sheets and are able to take out long-term contracts with TransCanada and are able to take advantage of very weak prices at the Alberta hub and move that gas to much higher value markets because they hold firm service. It's not unlike the oil situation in that regard, that people who hold firm service on things like TransCanada's Keystone Pipeline were able to buy very cheap WCS oil in Alberta and sell it at a much higher price once it got to the other end of the pipeline. In both cases of oil and gas, the issue here is commodities competing to get into the pipeline. We can compete just fine once we get to the other end of the pipeline, but because of pipeline constraints, entirely due to slow regulation, we have this competition to get into the pipe. And that's favored some people. People who hold firm service have been able to make a lot of money off that situation, both oil and gas.
Is it an unfair situation, Hal?
Sorry, is it what?
Is it unfair? I mean, is there an injustice here? The fact some people are benefiting, some people aren't?
Yeah, I don't know that it's unfair. I think it's a case of very financially strong, astute players taking advantage of a situation that's been created by regulatory dysfunction. If we can get the regulatory things sorted out and TransCanada's contracting practices modified a bit, this problem could be rectified quite quickly. But we need to move forward expanding the TransCanada system within Alberta. And in a bigger picture sense, we have to look at things like the pipeline from Fort St. John to Kitimat that is currently being contested by First Nations groups in BC. If we're going to have those kind of tragic outcomes, I think the government's got to really seriously think about how this is all being done.
We conclude with TransCanada plans to drop Canada from its name. It's going to be TC Energy. Are you sad to see the Canada come out of its moniker? Not really. I think it should be seen as a real good thing that a Canadian company, TransCanada, has been able to compete so successfully in the United States and in Mexico and dramatically expand its corporate footprint to the point where two Canadian companies today, Enbridge and TransCanada, are the largest pipeline companies in North America. And I think that's a credit to the capability of people in Calgary who run those companies, to the technical engineering and commercial people who get those projects built. The fact that more than half of TransCanada's cash flow and income comes from outside the country just reflects that they've become a North American player. And I think that the change in name to TC Energy is quite innocuous. They could have changed it to something completely different, but I think retaining the letters TC reflects the heritage and the history of a really great Canadian company. I think they're going to stay here in Calgary. I've seen no indication they're moving anywhere else.